Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Judy with the Travel Goods Association. Today it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Joanna Kalafatis. Joanna is an accomplished travel writer, creator, photographer, and even an actress. She has a wealth of experience traveling and sharing all of her insights. It was such a pleasure to meet her at the 2024 Travel Gift Show that happened this spring. She participated in our solo Women in Travel panel discussion. That's really hard to say, by the way. She brought some amazing insights, though. It was such a pleasure to meet her there. Before we dive in, I'd like to just remind you to join the Travel Goods Hub. This is our new social platform helping to create connections for all travel industry professionals, from brands to buyers and retailers to content creators. The show is kind of a place where we meet every year, but luckily with the Hub, we get to do that year round. So make sure you head over to travelgoods.org to join. Today's webinar is being recorded, so if you're missing anything, you'll be able to catch up later, and that will also be on the Hub. We are going to have a short Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions, you can drop them into the chat, and we'll make sure that we hit those when we get there. But without further ado, let me introduce Joanna Kalafatis.
Hello. I'm very happy to be here, as I love talking about women in travel, as I am a woman in travel. And mostly when I was typing up this presentation and thinking of what to talk about, I realized that a lot of the things I want to discuss are basically how not to do what I did. So how to learn through my trials and errors and not have my misadventures. So what I'm going to go over today is going to be, things for women traveling in general, solo women in travel as well, of course, because as we'll see, that's a very huge demographic at the moment. So yeah, I'll be sharing the presentation without further ado, so we can start. Here we are at the webinar series, figuring out the slide share. So, one second. There we go. Women in travel, picture of me in Argentina. This was my last trip before COVID. So first things first, before we get into the specifics, a lot of women who ask me about travel gear and travel tips, I feel like we have had so many messages from, society in general and just the way women traveling are presented in the world that like women traveling, and especially women traveling alone, is kind of this aberration, this super risky, like crazy thing. So I just want to go over a couple of things because like the reality is so different that it's actually kind of mind-blowing. So Overseas Adventure Travel, which is a travel company, said that 47% of their travelers are registered as solo, and 85% of those solo travelers were women. So if you want to travel alone as a woman, not only is that like not a strange thing, you're actually kind of the majority at this point, which is a wild thing to think about considering like 20, 30 years ago, those were definitely not the stats. Now, we are going to be going over safety gear and safety tips because a lot of women ask to go over it, and it's good things to know. But I did want to point out that worries about safety among women actually tend to decrease the more trips you take. And the reason I point that out is because I do want to go over safety gear, but I also want to emphasize that it's not actually as crazy, risky, or unsafe as you think. So I don't want like me going over safety gear and precautions to be like, oh, these things will all definitely happen to you and you will need this gear. I have not had to use like a fair amount of safety gear I carry with me, but it's good to have just in case. So we'll look at safety gear, we'll look at general travel gear, especially geared towards women, and dress and gear for women, because that's very important, especially depending on the country you're traveling to. And also the safety risk you actually don't think of. So first of all, where to start solo travel as a woman, how to get over those first hurdles. I always recommend that travel does not have to be, international adventurous. If you have never traveled alone before, but you really want to get out there, do something domestic, do like even a weekend trip away, pick somewhere that's very easy for you to access in terms of like language, infrastructure, somewhere that shares a lot of traits with where you come from. So it's less of a, like scary kind of idea. Some countries are going to be better for experienced travelers. Like I would not recommend certain countries I've been to, like, I had a great time, for example, going through Colombia alone and Brazil, but I would not say the woman's first solo destination should be, Colombia, because there are things to navigate that you probably should have more experience traveling before you navigate. My impression of this is that if you're going to explore a new to you region of the world, there are some travel countries that are easy to start with. Obviously, you don't want to overgeneralize and be like every country in Southern Africa is like this, every country in Middle East, North Africa is going to be like that. But there are certain traits regions of the world share. And if you start your travels there on some easier travel countries, easier meaning safer, first of all, for women, relatively good infrastructure ways of getting around, usually lots of English speakers. So you can see the countries listed here and a little bit recorded, like South Africa, Botswana, and Zambia are actually great destinations. In the Middle East, North Africa, Oman and Jordan are wonderful destinations for solo female travelers, incredibly safe and welcoming, things like that. And the one last reminder before we get into the gear, I want to say is that solo travel does not mean you have to be completely alone. Solo travel can also be part of group tours. And there are plenty of countries, including places like I'd say Egypt, where, women tend to report feeling somewhat unsafe alone, where there are a lot of female-led tours, a lot of blogger-led tours, and group tours that go there that you can join and just have an easier time navigating the country. And now there are also a lot of women-specific tours, no matter what you're into. So like if you're into history or culture, there's something for that. Intrepid Travel has women's only expeditions. Adventure Woman has more adventurous stuff. Honestly, sky's the limit. Travel companies are really understanding the shift towards women in travel and completely gearing their trips towards that now. Now, safety, what we want to talk about. So people tend to focus a lot on, violence, things that can happen to you, theft, because obviously it's quite scary for that to happen to you. And, true crime shows and news tends to kind of focus on those things. I want to point out that the biggest cause of accident, injury, whatever to people abroad is actually first car accidents and then drownings. Like people focus a lot on, oh, violence, I want to avoid being assaulted, but actually the biggest thing you should probably be worrying about is just being very aware of like the traffic rules and the different ways countries function. A lot of countries, especially coming from, more Western country, there's a lot of countries with aggressive driving cultures. I grew up in one of them. The roads function completely differently. Traffic functions completely differently. So car accidents tend to actually be a major issue with travelers abroad. That being said, once again, it's still not like a crazy difference from being at home. This one included these stats. 1,500 US citizens died abroad in 2017 and 2018, unnatural causes. In comparison, 36,000 people died from car crashes in the US in 2018. So it's not like, oh, you're going to travel, this is going to happen. Just like a thing to be aware of, instead of focusing only on like potential violent crime. I always recommend kind of not rented cars in places where you're unfamiliar with, maybe different direction driving, maybe very narrow, very not well-maintained roads. Using local transportation to get around is usually probably going to be the better option. Now, women, I argue, are actually uniquely positioned to stay safe while abroad, which runs counter to a lot of the messaging we receive. Now, the reason I say that is, and I know there are probably some men in this chat, so this is not to denigrate men at all, but I have many male friends and relatives who make personal safety decisions that seem to me insane because they have not been socialized to be so afraid for their safety and have to be on the lookout, even in their neighborhoods, even their cities. I had a guy friend at 2:30 a.m. in LA be like, oh, I'll take a Lime scooter and just ride across the city for 40 minutes. It's such a nice night. That like would not even cross my mind as a mild possibility of things I could do in LA. So the reason I say women are uniquely positioned is because unfortunately, when we're at home, but fortunately, when we're traveling abroad, a lot of the safety advice is already so ingrained in us. Stick to main, well-lit, populated roads, be back home at a certain time, really keep your eye on your surroundings. We have this as a reflex because of the way we have been socialized and brought up and the fear that's been ingrained into us. So we actually end up staying much safer abroad than the average solo man traveling does, for example. One thing I also always recommend in terms of decisions, strong proponent of hotels over Airbnbs if you're traveling as a woman abroad. We know that, Airbnb there have been some issues with Airbnb over the years that people have been reporting of like, they don't know what property they're walking into. There might be an issue with the lock if you're getting in late. Maybe I've been Airbnbs where there's an electronic lock that just jams and can't open at night when I'm trying to get in. You don't exactly have someone there watching out for you. Hotels, and preferably ones with a reception front desk, especially boutique hotels, you're going to have someone that is aware of where you are and kind of keeping an eye out for you. And I'll share a little story. I was in Cartagena, Colombia, and I went to Isla Grande for a day trip and ended up staying there overnight because I'm like, oh, it's nice. I don't want to leave yet. I'll leave tomorrow. I booked a, very cheap hotel there. In my hotel in Cartagena, I woke up to 10 emails and 5 phone calls from them being like, are you okay? You did not come home last night. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even realize you noticed that, but thank you. But no, I'm fine. I'm so sorry I didn't let you know. But that being said, hotels are going to be keeping an eye on you in a way that being alone in Airbnb, where you're not going to know what the building's exactly like in the neighborhood, it's just not going to be the same. And the very last thing on that is, should anything happen, so many people forget to do this and it's so basic. Always, always, always have health insurance in case of anything. Allianz, one of my favorite companies, Safety Wing and World Nomads are also especially geared towards travelers because some plans are comprehensive and they also include coverage for interruptions and lost property and things like that. So it's super important to have that with you. Now, let's get into the specific gear. Property theft. Ask someone who had her DSLR stolen on a train going to, where was it? Budapest. There we go. Anti-theft bags. Pack Safe and Travel On are two of my favorite brands, but there's a bunch of them out there. Now, they have RFID block capabilities, which I'll get into just a little further down. They're slash proof, they're zippers lock, they have hidden compartments. Now, could someone still come and, rip the whole thing off you? Yes, but it's going to protect against pickpocketing, and most people are just going to go for easier targets, quite honestly. The good thing is that anti-theft bags used to look pretty bad, let's say, like not necessarily something you'd chicly want to carry around a city. But as you can see, they're really cute backpacks, they're really cute purses now. They're completely anti-theft. And you won't look crazy walking around like Paris with something like that. Copies of all important documents. Me personally, I leave one form of identification in the hotel and I have one with me. So like driver's license, passport, I don't have both of them on me at the same time or at the hotel at the same time. If anything happens, you have one form of ID. Now, because we spoke about insurance, some expensive items, my DSLR, can be added to your home or property insurance. For an extra $15 a year, I added my DSLR, and thank God I did because I'd be out 3 grand. So that was a very good thing. And I highly recommend you look into your existing insurance because a lot of them do have these options for like really pricey items you'll be carrying with you on a trip. Now, I talked about RFID blocking technology. So basically, if you have one of those newer credit cards where all you have to do is like tap it and, information goes through, you don't have to insert or swipe, that's RFID technology. Now, the worry with that is that some people have developed technology to basically bring a scanner close enough to your bag where it'll take your credit card information without actually ever getting your credit card. So there's a new line of wallets, again, PackSafe and Travel On, same companies that I like to use, but again, there's a lot that they have wallets and anti-theft bags that completely prevent this technology from being able to be used. So no one can scan and steal your information because a lot of target of theft these days is data, not so much physical objects. So it is a real pain to have to cancel all your credit cards and start again and wait and, re-enter all your information. So I highly, highly recommend getting wallets that have this technology, bags that have this technology. Now, money belt or scarf is another thing. They actually have scarves now that have hidden compartments for money. And I always recommend you have some emergency cash and an ID of some sort in a money belt or a hidden scarf. So if someone does take your bag and they think they got your money, you at least have something with you to keep you going until you can get to bank, until you can get somewhere safe, until you can get wherever. For this, I will also say have in your phone number before you go your country's embassy number in the destination and the local emergency number, which will likely not be 911. The most iPhones will call it anyway. You might think the embassy is an exaggeration, but when I got my camera stolen in Budapest, not a single person at the police station spoke English, and they literally just called the embassy so I could speak to someone. And that's kind of what is done there, apparently. So you never know when you will need it. The last thing, which I find to be an issue when I'm traveling in more tropical destinations, it is very annoying to go to the beach and actually swim because you end up like, you don't want to leave your stuff. So you end up doing one of those like little dips in the water and just looking the whole time. You're 1 feet from shore and you're running back, and it's just not an enjoyable experience for anyone. So there are locking beach bags now. One of my favorites, FlexSafe, which essentially what it has is a lock that you can attach to a tree or an umbrella stand, and you can only open that lock with a key or with a combination. And it's like the anti-theft bag, slash proof, all that stuff, locking zippers. So you can leave your stuff and go for a bit more of an extended swim without going insane over someone stealing your stuff. Always a good thing. Now, here is general gear I think you should always have, related and unrelated to safety, quite honestly. Guys, travel with a power bank. I almost had to sleep on a bench in Kyoto, I want to say, because my phone died and I could not find my hotel and I could not find anything. And I arrived super late and everything was closed. That being said, I'd probably be safer sleeping on a bench in Kyoto than my apartment in LA, but it would be nice to just not have to do that. Power bank, universal adapter, always, always, always. It is the worst thing to run out of access to at this point. Maps, translation, internet, and communication all at once because you don't have battery. Second thing, very specific and very weird, but trust me, it comes in so handy. A microfiber towel. It's very lightweight. It's very easy to pack. It dries super easily, washes super easily, and you can use it for, honestly, you will end up needing it so many things: to clean up a spill, to wipe off your sweat, to, wipe off something that got wet in your bag. It comes in handy in ways you can't even imagine. And it's super lightweight and just very easy to clean on the road in a sink. So highly recommend. The other one, comfortable walking shoes. All birds are my favorite. There is nothing worse than having your second day in travel ruined by your first day of travel because you went 20,000 steps and the next day you can't step on that foot anymore. Now, this also falls into safety, but it's good to have a whistle or personal alarm. Tiger is one of my favorite brands. Essentially, each one works differently, but you either set the alarm or like unplug something, the alarm starts going, and it has something like a 500-foot radius, I think. So it's unlikely no one will hear that alarm if you set it off. This next one's a little weird because a lot of women travel and they assume that, I'll buy tampons, pads, whatever when I get there. Please bring your feminine hygiene products from home with you. There are so many places in the world where it is not as easy to access products as you'd think. And honestly, it doesn't have to be some like super off the beaten path destination. Like there are countries in Europe where the products they have available are just so uncomfortable. And you really just want to be carrying your preferred brand and your preferred feminine hygiene products from home. A lot of women swear by a menstrual cup. I've not tried it, but I hear it's great. But I always take something with me because you never know when, if, what you're going to find, and travel can disrupt your cycle. So you might have nasty surprises. The next thing I will say, guys, is especially if you're doing multi-destination or like different climates or perhaps different activities, like if a 3-day hiking trip and then a 3-day urban, city getaway, packing cubes. You separate everything out. So you have to make a total mess in your bag when you're going in to reach for, your one hiking gear and everything else is now a complete mess. I highly recommend the Marie Kondo method of packing. It has been life-changing for me. You essentially roll everything up and just place it like this in your bag in little rolls so you can look down and immediately see all your stuff. When you lay it flat, you have to go through everything, but now you can just see everything, take it out, insert it back. Your stuff stays neat. Another one that some people skip, especially if you're used to traveling in mostly, again, westernized countries, reusable water bottle, good for the environment and good for you. And also, especially with our climate, a lot of people are increasingly having issues with heat stroke when they're going to summer destinations. It's always good to have water on you, but also a water purifier, not a filter. And I'll go over why. A filter will still do a good enough job, but purifiers, honestly, it goes a step above. Two solutions I love is the UV water purifier. Springwell's the one I use, but again, many options that essentially you put a UV light in, you leave it for a designated amount of time, purifies all the water. You can drink water no matter where you are. So you're not at risk of like dehydration, heat stroke, all these things. There's also a purifying water bottle where you just literally put water in it and it has to be, charged, but Lark Purvis is the one I have. And it just cleans it all out for you. If you do want just the filter, LifeStraw works. But again, the issue is a lot of countries don't have good water treatment. And even countries that do, sometimes your stomach, if it's not used to it, can be very unreceptive to the microbes you find there. And, one of the biggest things to ruin your trip is to get sick for half your trip. So just skip that altogether and definitely use water purifying system. And of course, the last one is just for me, great camera for the memories. I mean, I love photography, so of course I'm going to say that. What I will recommend specifically is unless you're like a super pro photographer and you want like this astrophotography mural to be blown up from a photo you took, guys, most small cameras do such a good job these days. You do not need to be walking around like I stupidly did with like a $3,000 DSLR just marking you as a target for theft and as a tourist. The Lumix CS200 is great. The Fujifilm is great. And honestly, unless you're a super advanced photographer, those massive cameras are just going to have a bunch of features you never end up using and are going to unnecessarily overcomplicate your travels in life. So These are a couple of brands I recommend for like small but still great quality and unobtrusive cameras to have with you to just preserve great travel memories. So next, this is a bit controversial, might be too strong a word, but I realized that a lot of safety tips for women basically say, don't go out at night. Just don't, be safe when you travel. Don't go out at night. Don't drink out at night. It's going to go badly. I like nightlife. I like my cocktail bars. If I go in a city that has a top 50 cocktail bars, I'm going to that bar. So I think it's more effective to give people advice for what to do if you want to go out versus never leave the house after, the sunset. So this is how to enjoy a night out as a solo female traveler. I would also recommend obviously a drink maximum for this. I wouldn't go above 2 alcoholic beverages because then you do kind of your judgment starts to be obscured. One of my first tips, look at the ratio of men to women at the bar. If it is a heavily dude only bar, it might just not be the most comfortable or welcoming environment for you. I mean, it's unfortunate that that's the case, but that tends to be the case. What I always do, and I found that works for me, grab a seat by the bartenders. It makes it very easy to just like meet and talk to people. People tend to talk strangers at a bar, and you can talk to the bartender and ask about the town and ask any tips they have. Honestly, it's a great resource if they're up for talking and not too busy, obviously, but also for safety reasons. Like there are always going to be exceptions. Obviously, someone's going to say, "Oh, I know a bar where the bartenders were into the scam for women." Sure, but the vast majority of the time, bartenders and bar managers have a vested interest in nothing horrible happening at their bar and like no tourists being, taken advantage of there. So if you have a clear eye line of the bartender, you're right there. It's just safer than being at some corner where no one who works there can see you. What I always do is when I get the first drink, I leave a nice tip, even if it's not a typical culture, and strike up a little bit of a conversation just so you get a bit of their attention and you get a bit of their focus. Um, Obviously, always keep an eye on your drink is, something all our mothers told us, I'm sure, at some point, and sealed bottles and cans preferred, but it's good advice wherever you are. The other piece of advice I'd give is to use Facebook groups. Now, I'm a member of Girls Love Travel. There's a bunch of female Facebook groups. And you can meet people in your destination, whether it's travelers passing through or girls that live there. I can't tell you how many times someone has posted, I'm in Rome tonight. Is anyone there? And they're like, yeah, I am, girl. I'll meet up with you. And it's nice to just, you get to form a connection. And also there's safety in numbers, you go out with another woman or two that you meet in town, there were travelers, and you're going to have a good time and also probably be a little safer. Another option is I've used tours by locals and with locals to do tours guided by locals. And for example, in Colombia, I had a wonderful girl named Eva do a tour with me in the afternoon of this part of the city. And then we ended up going out for drinks that night, which was a great decision because she also knew how to skip the line at the door, apparently. So I would not have gotten that if I were alone. And I also felt comfortable going to a dance club, which alone can be a little intimidating in a destination. If you want to meet up with groups of people and maybe have a less lonely date, meetup.com is great for people that share interests. You can find people who want to do like hikes or interest in photography or meet up, at a local restaurant once a week and just meet up and chat. You can go online and just kind of sign up and attach to a group that speaks to your interests. If you want to have peace of mind, I always recommend turning on Find My, or if you don't have an iPhone, the equivalent, and attaching your location to a friend or family member. Super important. That is currently awake in the time zone they are in while you're out. It's not very helpful to you if your, mom has your location as asleep currently. And just have them, kind of keep an eye. I mean, to be honest, my friends and I do this when we go out on first dates. Someone has a Find My attached, and we just kind of keep an eye on like, okay, you're at the bar you said you'd be. Okay, you're back home. All good. It's just a little peace of mind thing. And the reason this next point ties into nightlife, support boutique locally owned hotels, especially female owned, and talk to them. So I kind of mentioned before that, these hotels will be keeping an eye on you. But also when you go to boutique hotels that are run by locals, owned by locals, they are going to give you so much great information on what, bars, what restaurants, what neighborhoods to stay away from, where to be directed, where you should probably go. Honestly, one of the best things you can do is just ask locals what they recommend because they know their city better than anyone and better than any advice I or anyone could give you. A last thing that a lot of women surprisingly don't know about, there are female driver only taxi services in pretty much every country I've traveled to, honestly, up to this point. London has Anissa Cars, Egypt has Pink Taxi, there's other examples. And these services are basically meant to make to encourage obviously safety of women, to make women feel more comfortable. If you're leaving a bar at 2 a.m., you need a taxi to get home. You've booked a women only, women driven taxi. And it's just an extra layer of, safety and security and comfort for women. Next up, how to dress. All right. So this is going to be twofold. And I'm going to preface by saying, the feminist in me wants to be like, it sucks that like women have to be covered up a certain way in certain countries. But honestly, every country has its own thing. You're not going to change the culture by going, to Egypt and wearing like booty shorts one day. So just respect the dress code, follow along, and blend in. Because honestly, blending in is a great way to just, again, make yourself safer. But I'm not only going to talk about, how to dress modestly, conservatively for countries that require it, but also how to dress appropriately, meaning every city has kind of unwritten dress rules. And whether that means like some cities are more formal or informal, some cities just have like their own kind of style. Like, in Athens right now in the summer, you can go out at night to club in shorts and sandals, and you can't do that in other parts of the world. And if you go out in heels and a dress, everyone might be staring at you. Um, and it plays a role because again, you don't want to be marked as a super outsider who like does not know what they're doing in the city. And I'll kind of teach you some of the tips I've learned around this. So this is going to be general. The dress code varies from country to country. And what's modest, guys, also really varies. There are some countries where like, shoulders and knees is fine. There are some countries where you could have your belly out, but like your legs have to be fully covered. It's very different definitions depending on the country you're going to. So it's not going to always be one size fits all. I find that female travel blogger packing lists really help. Like people who have visited the country or from that country be like, this is what worked for me. This is specifically what I took. And they'll link to even specific clothes they wore. Um, Not influencer. And I'll get back to why I don't want this to sound anti-influencer because it's not. It's just that sometimes the things people wear on Instagram in various countries do not necessarily reflect the reality of what you would wear in that country. So general tips though, shoulders and knees covered, long flowy pants or dresses, nothing too form-fitting, and a scarf that can double as a hair covering. I always find a kaftan or a shawl, like in Egypt, I would just throw a kaftan over me, over anything I wore, and would just infinitely make my life easier for walking around the streets. I forgot it once and it was immediately like just a lot of harassment and stares, and it just made me feel very uncomfortable. So I threw it on and it was fine. Same for again, big scarves, pashminas, we've been over that. Here's what I use, my little Instagram tip. If you're going to a city, it could be whatever city. Like I just went to Georgia and I'm like, I don't know what people would wear in Tbilisi. Like I know it's really warm right now and I know nothing else. So I went to Instagram. I went to a couple of like neighborhoods and restaurants and places I wanted to go to. And I went to the location, I went into the photos, and I saw what people were wearing. Now, super important. This is why I said not influencers. Don't go to the top posts, go to the most recent posts, because the top posts are going to have a lot of local or international kind of like influencer, like, hot IG content. And again, it's probably not going to be super reflective of what actual everyday people there are wearing. Um, so just see what, photos, recently uploaded photos of people don't have big followings and are just there on a night out, what they wore out there. So you kind of start getting a sense. Like I did that for, 5, 6 places in Tbilisi, and I just started to get a sense of, oh, this is kind of how people dress Tbilisi. And I was like, oh, the specific restaurant I want to go to doesn't appear that formal. Good. I don't need to do that. Super important. So now some last tips to kind of encapsulate everything. Like I said, this has been a running theme. Blend in as much as possible. And look, I realize there are countries where we won't blend in because of our appearance, right? Like there's certain very monoethnic countries where you won't look like the population and people can tell you're not from there. But it's better that people think you at least know the country well or travel there or something. What I always suggest and what I always do my first day in a new place, I post up at a cafe or a bar, depending on the time of, day, restaurant, whatever, somewhere outside, somewhere on a thoroughfare. And I kind of just sit there for a couple hours, chill, people watch, because it really just gives you an idea of how people move and act around that country. Like, for example, if you're in Japan, you'll quickly realize that being very loud on public transportation, a lot of places like that is an automatic no-no and is just going to get you stares. If you're in Greece, where I am right now, you'll realize that not being loud is probably going to get you looked at as an outsider. But there are just certain things that are helpful. So if you just sit and people watch for a bit, you can also observe, how traffic works, all those things, how people crossing the street, how people are navigating everything. It just helps you get an idea of how people navigate that city. And when you sit there without a camera, just ordering your coffee or your food or whatever, it's a really good way to kind of get a little bit into the mode of a city without, drawing much attention to yourself, essentially. So blending in again with dress, with your manner, it's very important because people are just you're less likely to draw attention to yourself. Now, again, connect, connect, connect. And by that, I mean connect to people who live there, whether you meet them there, whether you meet them online, connect to people and get a really good idea of what traveling or living in that destination is like. A couple of caveats to this, which is everyone will always have outlier experiences. For example, I just saw on one of the forums I'm in that a woman said, I just went to Santorini and I had the worst experience. I was sexually harassed nonstop all the time. And it was surprising to me because, I haven't had that experience. No one I know has had that experience in Santorini. And obviously, it's not to invalidate, like, that's horrible for her. But it is like, okay, outlier experiences will happen. And sometimes it's not the general vibe of a place. It just could be one person had a bad experience somewhere. Like, I got robbed in Budapest. It doesn't mean that like everyone who goes to Budapest gets robbed. Most people have great experiences. So if one person is saying, this place is horribly unsafe, and then 15 people are saying, oh, no, I was actually fine, it probably was just bad luck on their part. If 10 people are saying this is a very unsafe place and three people are like, I guess it's okay, then you should probably listen to that. The other important thing, guys, is to get firsthand knowledge from people who look or are like you. Like I am a, white cis woman. I might find a certain destination very accepting and very safe, but a woman who looks visibly queer might not have the same experience. A woman who isn't white might not have the same experience. The great thing is that there are so many blogs out there. There's so much information out there from travelers of like all races, all sizes, all genders, all sexual orientations. So you can definitely find someone who has been to where you want to be and can give you their experience of what it was like to navigate that place. And that's super important because in the same way that women sometimes want specific tips that like a man might not need for a place, obviously there are a lot of, subdivisions, let's say, of women that might need the same kind of tailored, personalized tips. This next one, I was thinking whether to include or not, because I assume we all have common sense here, but I'm going to say just in case, because I've heard of it happening like a surprising amount of time. Even if there's some risky behavior you might engage in at home, everything from like, I don't know, doing drugs to like one night stands, whatever. Guys, please don't do that when you're traveling abroad. I mean, it's crazy that, I say this, but I know of not super close people, but the people I know of generally that have been like mugged or, had a gun held to their head in destinations have been like in the process of buying drugs or doing something like that. And I'm like, well, just don't do that. Just don't do that. Don't do anything like that. Countries are very different in how they handle it, how they legally, reprimand it. Just don't. Just go have a vacation, go back to doing risky behavior. I mean, or don't go back to doing it ever, honestly. Like, don't do risky stuff you do at home abroad. And most importantly, I know we've talked a lot about safety and gear and tips and how to kind of navigate the world. But most importantly, guys, 99.9% of women traveling solo have an absolutely amazing time. So, get some of this gear, use some of these tips, but don't let it overtake your travels. Don't let it be so much in your mind that, you're walking around being like, oh, what's around this corner? Oh my God, I'm gonna get robbed. Oh my God. Like, it's probably going to be fine. It's just good to have all this stuff as backups and as safety devices and all that. So, at the end of the day, my major thing is have all this with you and be prepared, but you likely won't need it and enjoy your trip.
I do have a quick question for you. Who has been like your mentor or inspiration for traveling? Like, do you have somebody that you've always really idolized, or was it like a family member that really introduced you to traveling? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my answer is so cliche because it's so many people's, but like I love Anthony Bourdain's travel show, so I'm just going to put that out there as someone who I love the way he traveled, which was a lot about connecting with people and talking about, issues people were facing in their countries, not just like the top 5 beaches or whatever. For me personally, my inspiration came from my study abroad trip because I had always traveled. My family put a big premium on travel. We did travel a fair amount of places when I was young. Also in Europe at the time, so it was just easy to get to other places. But when I studied abroad, I went to two different countries and I stayed with homestay families, four destinations in each. And that experience of like staying with a local family and really just understanding their life and their culture from just a very different perspective than, going somewhere to like a four-star hotel and chilling and go to the pool. It was really life-changing for me. And it changed, I think, the way I want to travel and the places I want to go to. But yeah, to me, Bourdain was a big inspiration because he really connected with people, over a drink, over a meal, and really got under the skin of some countries in a way that I haven't seen many people do. So that was it for me.
Obviously, you're very well connected in the travel industry with creators and friends and everybody else that you're meeting. In that aspect, like who are great creators that you follow or friends that you know of that really kind of inspire you or even mentor. I don't want to say mentor you, but kind of like give
Right.
you more advice, especially when you were just like starting out.
Um, a lot, honestly. Rachel Rodwald to me is absolutely incredible. I love her. It was so amazing getting to see her at TGA because it was really like a fangirl moment for me. I'm like, oh my God, like we talked online, but I think I'd only met her very briefly once. So getting like sit and chat with her was a bit of a Rachel moment for me. Juliana Dever also has given me tons of great advice, especially now I was traveling the Caucasus because she knows the region really well and she does a lot of group tours. Onika, the traveler, amazing resource and really she has a great sense of humor too. Like I really love her content because she delivers a lot of stuff in quite a funny but informative way. Um, and yeah, those are top three for me. I mean, there's a lot, but those are definitely top three people for me.
Catherine says, what made solo female travelers so popular? Well, most of them end up hanging out with a lot of their female friends on these trips. Is this what motivates them without being alone?
One thing, I think it was a confluence of things. I think I mean, I think a lot of it is just, a lot of the progress women have made and being able to be like, oh, I can be alone. And women also being alone in their lives for longer periods of time, right? Like the average marriage age is older. There's more people who are divorced. So there's more people who don't have like a built-in kind of partner to travel with. But also, I honestly know a lot of women in relationships who are like, I really want to take this trip and my husband can't take time off. So I'm just gonna 1 week. Because I think a lot of women realize that A, the world wasn't as scary as they'd been led to believe. I mean, it's funny to me when a lot of people who live in major US cities that are not the safest ask me like, oh my God, I'm traveling to like Slovenia and I'm so scared. Like you shouldn't be. It's way safer than your home city, trust me. Slovenia is fine. Um, but yeah, so I think they realized, a lot of the external world was not as dangerous or as risky as they perceived. Um, and I think a lot of women have gotten increasing satisfaction and happiness out of fulfilling their own dreams. Like I think there's been a big shift of like women kind of giving gifts to themselves, if that makes any sense. I mean, my one of my best friends who loves to travel, but like had never done solo travel, was very, very just scared of the prospect. And she's an incredibly busy, successful woman. She has a child, she has, so it's just she has no time to herself. And I convinced her to go to one of her favorite destinations for a week alone. And she has thanked me so many times. Like, it's one of the best things I did because, as women, especially, I feel like we are still primed to give so much of our time and our energy to other people. And solo travel is something that you do completely for yourself, unapologetically. Like, I want to go there. I want to experience this. I'll get up when I want. I'll do what I want when I want. And I feel like as women, we have so little of that time in our daily life where it's like, I'm just going to do everything I want when I want, and I don't care what anybody thinks, that it's very freeing to have like a week or 10 days of I am completely in command of my own time and energy and schedule. It is a rare, beautiful gift to give ourselves. That's why I think it's become so popular.
Another question is, do you ever feel weird going out for dinner by yourselves? Sometimes I notice I'm the only solo traveler at a restaurant and people do look over.
Definitely. And I'll say that that's also very country dependent. Like in Japan, it was very normal to be out by myself when I was there. But there are like even in Greece, in my hometown, I still feel weird if I want to go out by myself because it's a very like social culture. So people are like, why are you going out alone? Are you okay? Do you need, there's kind of that thing. Um, you'll definitely feel weird sometimes. Like, I'm not going to say that there's no moment where you'll feel strange or you won't get stares or someone will be like, hey, where's your husband? You should find a husband, and be very, annoying and intrusive like that. Um, but mostly, I take a book with me. I have my phone and browsing things. Or sometimes, honestly, I'm just kind of like lost in my own thoughts for an hour, which is again an experience I feel we rarely get to have anymore. And sometimes when you're alone, I find it weirdly makes it easier to make connections somewhere. Like when I'm traveling somewhere with a group, most people aren't going to come up and talk to a group of like 4 or 5 people. And you also don't feel the need to go talk to anyone because you're like, well, I have my social group right here. Why would I? When you're alone, people will much more easily be like, hey, where are you from? What are you doing here? Like just start talking. And I've ended up making a lot more connections when I travel alone. So yeah, there'll be times when you're alone and it's definitely strange. And you just learn to kind of ignore that. You'll never see those people again. It doesn't matter. But there are times where it also leads to great connections.
Can you name three of the best websites to buy travel gear from? That's a
Oh my
heavy
God.
question.
Honestly, a lot of the ones I mentioned are kind of my favorites. That's why I mentioned. Yeah, PackSafe for me is absolutely great. I think like a lot of my gear. I mean, a lot of people also just use Amazon because you have access to everything. But if you want to directly support the companies, uh, travel pack, I just blanked. Guys, I haven't bought any
Travel on,
travel
I
in
think
a
is
year.
what you brought up earlier.
Yes, yes,
Yep.
travel back. Like I haven't bought this stuff for a year and I blank so badly. My memory's going. Yeah, I mean, Amazon is a one-stop shop, but I'd say both PackSafe and Travel Pack are great, great stuff for gear overall.
Are most solo female travelers single or married with kids?
I'd say most of them are single that I've met at least. I don't have the data on my fingers right now. But it's not like a massive majority. There are plenty of solo women who are married or solo women with kids. I think that's done more now. I think it's more, and in some ways, I'll share this story. I was reading a story of, I do forget her name. And she was the first woman in the Traveler Century Club. If you guys don't know what that is, it's a club for people who've traveled to over 100 countries and territories to join. And she was the first woman, I think, to go to every single territory. She was in her 80s when this happened. And they interviewed her because she was married the entire time she was traveling, almost like in her early 20s, I think she got married. And they were like, does your husband love to travel? She goes, no, he hates it. I usually go alone. And they asked, well, how does that work with your relationship? She goes, it's great because we spend a week apart. We have all these experiences and we come back and it's felt like we're teenagers in love the entire time we've been married because we have all these new things to like add to each other and new things to talk about and different experiences we can then, come together over. And it was such a beautiful perspective on it. And yeah, I do think that it is being done more. Like, I gave the example of my friend married with kids, and she's like, I need a week. I need a week because I just absolutely do for my sanity, basically.
Yeah, I think of Beth Santos. I know she's
Yes,
really big in the travel industry, and she's always like, "Nope, I want to be by myself. Leave the kids and the husband at home. I'm gonna go have fun."
exactly. And like the couples I know, that handle that well, they trade off really well. Like the husband might want to go on a trip or have a business trip. And it's like, all right, I'll watch this week, or you're really busy at work. And then the next week when I'm off, you'll do this. It's communication and compromise and all that.
Are solo female travelers traveling more local than overseas?
Um, I don't think so. I bump into so many of them overseas.
Yeah.
Honestly, more than local, because I feel like obviously you can do it local too, but I feel like it's actually probably the inverse because a lot of local trips, people are like, oh, we can arrange with a group of friends to go on like a weekend trip somewhere, a 3-day trip somewhere. We can measure up everyone's schedules enough to do that. But a lot of the reason people solo travel is that they have a big trip they want to take, long distance, international, whatever. And it's really hard. Sometimes they do want to go with other people, but it's so hard to have like your two best friends, have their time off line up, their finances line up, their favorite destinations line up that they also want to go to. And you're like, well, if I don't go, I'm just never going to do it. If I'm waiting for other people, I'm just never going to do it. So I think then they're actually more solo female travelers internationally for that reason, because they're like, this was the only way I could do the trip alone.
Yeah, I hear that a lot actually. They're just like, I can't wait for my friends anymore. We got to just do it.
Right. Whereas like a Labor Day weekend, 2 hours away, you're like, all right, we can get like 5 people together for that. That's fine. We can figure it out.
Yeah. Annalise had a comment and says also check out your local luggage stores. They're amazing resources for narrowing down gear needs. Ask them, the owners, they're usually passionate about travel and the money goes back into the community. That's a really great tip right there.
That is a great tip. Always, always, if you can support local, guys, support local. That's why with hotels, with everything, just go local.
Someone asked, how long do you give yourself to plan for a solo trip?
Oh my God, it really depends. I'm not the best planner. I'm just gonna say it, which is partly why I have all these things with me because, like power banks, because I'm just not gonna plan appropriately to have enough battery for my entire day. I'm just not gonna do that. It depends. Usually it's like maybe, I'll get excited about a destination. I'll book like a month or two in advance and I'll get a general idea, but then I probably will come back to like the actual what I'm gonna do each day, like maybe 5, 6 days before. The trip to Georgia, I booked 2 days before going. I don't even know what happened. I was just like, I have time off and I have money and I need to go somewhere close because my goal is to hit 50 countries by the end of this year. And I have 2 more left now after Georgia. Um, so yeah, Georgia was like book, plan, done in 48 hours before the plane departed. Planes also, if they have Wi-Fi, at least a great resource for like just planning out your little trip.
What are the number of days per trip on average, do you think, for a solo female traveler?
A lot of them are international. I think 6 to 8 days is probably like a good estimate because I think when you start going above that, maybe you're like, all right, now I kind of like want to be with a friend or I kind of want to be with someone I know. But below that, like you're not going to do a, 10-hour flight for 3 days. So most seem to be around a week, at least that I'm aware of. Obviously, if you live in places like now that I'm in Athens and so many destinations are accessible, I can go for like 3 days to somewhere relatively cheap and easy and like a 1.5 hour flight. Um, but yeah, a lot of solo female trips tend to be that. Now, there are a lot of digital nomads and backpackers and other people who will do like my longest continuous trip was 6 weeks on the road in 8 different countries on 2 different continents. And I had a wonderful time. But towards the end, you do start to be like, you sort of feel a little like I'd like to be home. I'd like to just, not be seeing new things because you also weirdly do get a little burned out. Like I always recommend if you're going to take an extended trip, have like one day or at least a half day each week that you've built in to just kind of do nothing, whether that's like watch Netflix or just go chill at a coffee shop and read for like 6 hours, because you will get burned out. Like you will get to a point where you're like, oh, it's another church. Who cares? Like, I don't, you will, and you don't want to get to the point where you're not enjoying your trip anymore because you're so exhausted from just running from attraction to attraction. So build in your like a do nothing time once a week on like longer kind of backpacking or whatever trips, just to kind of decompress and continue to be excited for the new things you're seeing.
You need a vacation from your vacation sometimes, right?
Right, because then you
That's
get the
that's
point
the
where you're
thing.
like, oh, it's a museum, whatever. I don't, it's a lot of pretty architecture. I don't know. I just want to go sleep.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Joanna. I think we hit all the questions. I am so happy to have you. Like I said, when we started, I was like, I'm kind of fangirling a little bit. So thank you for joining us. I really, really appreciate you coming.
So happy to
Um,
be here. You guys are always great. Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you. The webinar was recorded, so we are going to be posting that onto the hub. It'll be on our YouTube channel later, and Joanna will have access to it as well. So I'll make sure that that is up, and we'll introduce that, or yeah, that's the word. We'll introduce that when we have it.
Sounds good.
But thank you so much. We appreciate it, and we look forward to talking to you soon.